Chapter 11. On the Doorstep. In 2 days' going, they rode right up the long lake and passed out into the river running, and now they could all see the lonely mountain towering grim and tall before them. The stream was strong and their going slow. At the end of the 3rd day, some miles up the river, they drew in to the left or western bank and disembarked. Here they were joined by the horses with other provisions and necessities, and the ponies for their own use had been sent up to meet them. They packed what they could on the ponies, and the rest was made into a store under a tent, but none of the men of the town would stay with them, even for the night so near to the shadow of the mountain. "Not at any rate until the songs have come true," they say. It was easier to believe in the dragon, and less easy to believe in Thor in these wild parts. Indeed, their stories had no need of any guard, for all the land was desolate and empty. And so their escort left, making off swiftly down the river and on the shoreward paths, although the night was already drawing on. They spent a cold and lonely night, and their spirits fell. The next day they set out again. Balin and Bilbo rode behind, each leading another pony heavily laden beside him. The others were some way ahead, picking out a slow road, for there were no paths. They made northwest, slanting away from the river running, and drawing ever nearer and nearer to the great spur of the mountain that flung out southward towards them. It was a weary journey, and a quiet and a stealthy one. There was no laughter or song or sound of harps, and the pride and hope which had stirred in their hearts the singing of old songs by the lake died away to a plodding gloom. They knew that they were drawing near to the end of their journey, and it might be a very horrible end. The land about them grew bleak and barren, though once, as Thorin told them, it had once been green and fair. There was little grass, and before long there was neither bush nor tree, only broken and blackened stumps to speak of ones long vanished. There they came to the desolation of the dragon, and they were come to the waning of the year. They reached the skirts of the mountain all the same without meeting any danger or sign of the dragon, other than the wilderness out which he had made about his lair. The mountain lay dark and silent before them, and even higher above them. They made their first camp on the western side of the great southern spur, which ended in a height called Ravenhill. On this there had been an old watch-post, but they dared not climb it yet. It was too exposed. Before setting out to search the western spurs of the mountain for the hidden door, on which all of their hope rested, Thorin sent out a scouting expedition to spy out the land to the south where the front gate stood. For this purpose he chose Balin and Fili and Kili, and with them went Bilbo. They marched right under the grey and silent cliffs to the feet of Ravenhill. There the river, after winding a wide loop over the valley of Dale, turned from the mountain on its lonely road to the lake, flowing swift and noisily. Its bank was bare and rocky, tall and steep above the stream, gazing out from over it from the narrow water, foaming and splashing among many boulders. They could see in the wide valley shadowed by the mountain's arms the grey ruins of ancient houses, towers, and walls. "There lies all that is left of Dale," said Balin. The mountain sides were green with woods, and all the sheltered valleys rich and pleasant in the days when the bells rang in that town. He looked both sad and grim as he said this. He had been one of Thorin's companions on the day the dragon came. They did not dare to follow the river much further towards the gate, but they went on beyond the end of the southern spur, until lying hidden behind a rock they could look out and see the dark cavernous opening in a great cliff wall between the arms of the mountain. Out of it the waters of the running river sprang, and out of it too there was a stream, a steam and a dark smoke. Nothing moved in the waste, save the vapor in the water, and every now and then a black and ominous crow. The only sound was the sound of stony water, every now and then the harsh croak of a bird. Balin shuddered. "Let us return," he said. "We can do no good here, and I don't like these dark birds. They look like spies of evil." "The dragon is still alive in the halls under the mountain, then, or I am to imagine from the smoke," said the Hobbit. "That does not prove it," said Balin, "though I don't doubt you are right. But he may have gone away some time, or he might be lying out on the mountainside keeping watch, and I expect smokes and steams would come out of the gates. All the halls must be filled with this foul reek." With such gloomy thoughts, followed ever by croaking crows above them, they made their weary way back to the camp. Only in June they had been guests in the fair house of Elrond, and through autumn that was now crawling towards winter, that pleasant time seemed years ago. They were alone in this perilous waste, without hope of further help. They were at the end of their journey, but as far as ever, it seemed, from the other end of their quest. None of them had much spirits left. Now, strange to say, Mr. Baggins had more than others. He would often borrow Thorn's map and gaze at it, pondering over the runes and the meaning of the moon letters Elrond had read. It was he that had made the dwarves begin the dangerous search on the western slopes for the secret door. They moved in their camp then to a long valley, narrower than the great dale in the south where the gates of the river stood, and walled with the lower spurs of the mountain. Two of these here thrust forward west from the main mass in long steep ridges that fell ever downward toward the plain. On this western side there were fewer signs of the dragon's marauding feet, and there were some grass for the ponies. From this western camp, shadowed all day and by cliff and wall until the sun began to sink towards the forest, day by day they toiled in parties searching for paths up the mountainside. If the map was true, somewhere high above the cliff at the valley's head must stand the secret door. Day by day they came back to their camp without success. But at last, unexpectedly, they found what they were seeking. Fili and Kili and the Hobbit went back one day down the valley and scrambled along the tumbled rocks at its southern corner. About midday, creeping behind a great stone that stood alone like a pillar, Bilbo came on what looked like rough steps going upward. Following these excitedly, he and the dwarves found traces of a narrow track, often lost, often rediscovered, that wandered on to the top of the southern ridge and brought them at last to a still narrower ledge, which turned north across the face of the mountain. Looking down, they saw they were at the top of a cliff at the valley's head, and were gazing down on their own camp below. Silently, clinging to the rocky wall on the right, they went in single file along the ledge, till the wall opened and they turned into a little steep-walled bay, grassy-floored, still and quiet. Its entrance, which they had found, could not be seen from below, because of the overhanging of the cliff, nor further off, because it was so small that it looked like a dark crack, and no more. It was not a cave, and was open to the sky above, but at its inner end a flat wall rose up in that lower part, close to the ground, was as smooth and upright as a mason's work, but without a joint or crevice to be seen. No sign there was of any post or lintel or threshold, nor any sign of bar or bolt or keyhole, yet they did not doubt that they had found the door at last. They beat on it, they thrust and pushed at it, they implored it to move, and they spoke fragments of broken spells of opening, and nothing stirred. At last they tried out their rested on the grass at its feet, and then at evening began their long climb down. There was much excitement in the camp that night. In the morning they prepared to move once more. Only Beaufort and Bumper were left behind to guard the ponies and such stores they had brought with them from the river. The others went down the ledge and went along the valley and up the newly found path, and so to the narrow ledge. Along this they could carry no bundles or packs, so narrow and breathless it was, with a fall of 150 feet beside them onto sharp rocks below. But each of them took a good coil of rope and wound it tight around his waist, and so at last, without mishap, they reached the little grassy bay. There they made their third camp, hauling up what needed from below with their ropes. Down the same way they were able to occasionally lower one of the more active dwarves, such as Keely, to exchange such news as there was, or to take a share in the guard below, while Beaufort was hauled up to the higher camp. Bumper would not come up either the rope or the path. "I am too fat for such fly walks," said he. "I should turn too dizzy and tread on my beard, and he should have to be 13 again, and knotted ropes are too slender for my weight." Lucky for him, that was not true, as you will see. In the meanwhile, some of them explored the ledge beyond the opening, and found a path that led higher and higher onto the mountain. But they did not dare venture very far that way, nor was there much use to it. Out up there a silence reigned, nor was there much use, nor broken by no bird or sound except the wind in the crannies of a stone. They spoke low and never called or sang, for danger brooded in every rock. The others were busy with the secret of the door, had no more success. They were too eager to trouble about the runes of the moon letters, but tried without resting to discover what exactly in the smooth face of the rock the door had hidden. They had brought pegs and tools of many sorts from Lake Town, and at first they tried to use these, but when they struck the stone, the handles splintered and jarred their arms cruelly, and the steel heads broke or bent like lead. Mining work, they saw clearly, was no good against the magic that had shut this door. They grew terrified, too, of the echoing noise. Bilbo found sitting on the doorstep lonesome and wearisome. There was not a doorstep, of course, really, but they used the called little grassy space between the wall and the opening, the doorstep, in fun. Remember Bilbo's words long ago at the unexpected party in its hobbit hole, when he said they could sit on the doorstep till they thought of something. And sit and think they did, or wander aimlessly about, and glummer they became. Their spirits had risen a little at the discovery of the path, but now they sank into their boots, and yet they could not give it up and go away. The hobbit was no longer much brighter than the dwarves. He would do nothing but sit with his back to the rock face and stare away west through the opening, over the cliff, over the wide lands to the black wall of Mirkwood, and to the distances beyond, in which sometimes he thought he could see glimpses of the misty mountains, small and far. If the dwarves asked him what he was doing, he answered, "You said sitting on the doorstep and thinking would be my job, not to mention getting outside, so I'm sitting and thinking. But I'm afraid he was not thinking much of the job. He but would have lay beyond that blue distance, the quiet western land and the hill and this hobbit hole beneath it." A large grey stone lay in the centre of the grass, and he stared moodily at it or watched the great snails. They seemed to love the little shut-in bay with its walls of cool rock, and there were many of them, of huge size, crawling slowly and stickily along its sides. "Tomorrow begins the last week of autumn," said Thorin one day. "And after winter comes autumn, and winter comes after autumn," said Bifur. "And next year after that," said Dwalin. "And our beards will grow till they hang down the cliff to the valley before anything happens here. What is our burglar doing for us? Since he has got an invisible ring, and ought to be a specially excellent performer now, I'm beginning to think that he might go through the front gate and spy things out of it." Bilbo heard this. The dwarves were on the rocks just above the enclosure where he was sitting, and, good gracious, he thought, so that's what they're bringing me to think, is it? It's always poor me that has to get them out of their difficulties, at least since the wizard left. Whatever am I going to do? I might have known that something dreadful would happen to me in the end. I don't think to bear if I could see the unhappy Valley of Dale again. As for the steaming gate... That night he was very miserable, and hardly slept. Next day the dwarves went wandering off in various directions. Some were exercising ponies down below, some were roving about the mountainside. All day Bilbo sat gloomily in the grassy bay, gazing at the stone or out west through the narrow opening. He had a queer feeling that he was waiting for something. Perhaps the wizard will come back today, he thought. If he lifted his head, he could see a glimpse of a distant forest. As the sun turned west, there was a gleam of yellow upon its far roof, as if light had caught the last pale leaves. Soon he saw the orange ball of the sun sinking towards the level of his eyes. He went to the opening, and there, a pale and faint, was a thin new moon above the rim of the earth. At that very moment he heard a sharp crack behind him. There on the grey stone in the grass there was an enormous thrush, nearly coal-black, with his pale yellow beak freckled with dark spots. Crack! It caught a small snail that was knocking on a stone. Crack! Crack! Suddenly Bilbo understood. Forgetting all danger, he stood on the ledge and hailed the dwarves, shouting and waving. Those that were nearest came tumbling over the rocks as fast as they could over the ledge to him, wondering what on earth was the matter, and the others shouted to be hauled up on the ropes, except Bombar, of course. He was asleep. Quickly Bilbo explained. They all fell silent. The hobbits standed by the grey stone, and the dwarves with wagging beards watched impatiently. The sun sank lower and lower, and their hopes fell. It sank into a belt of reddened cloud and disappeared. The dwarves moaned, but still Bilbo stood among, almost without moving. The little moon was dipping towards the horizon. Evening was coming on. Then suddenly, when their hope was at the lowest, a red ray of sun escaped like a finger through a rent in the cloud. A gleam of light came straight through the opening into the bay and fell on the smooth rock face. The old thrush, head cocked to one side, gave a sudden trill. There was a large crack. A flake of rock split from the wall and fell. A hole appeared suddenly, about 3 feet from the ground. Quickly, trembling lest the chance should fade, the dwarves rushed to the rock and pushed, in vain. The key, said Bilbo. Where's Thorin? Thorin hurried up. The key, shouted Bilbo. The key that went with the map. Now try it while there's still time. Then Thorin stepped up and drew the key from the chain from around his neck. He put it in its hole. It fitted and turned. Snap! The gleam went out. The sun sank. The moon was gone, and the evening sprang to the sky. Now they all pushed together, and slowly a part of the rock wall gave way. Long straight cracks appeared and widened. A door 5 feet high and 3 broad was outlined, and slowly, without sound, it swung inward. It seemed as if darkness flowed like a vapor from the hole in the mountainside, and deep darkness, in which nothing could be seen, lay before their eyes, a yawning mouth leading in and down.